Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Enforcer Nostalgia out May 5th on Nuclear Blast. The album has 13 tracks, 41 minutes in length, and this is the band's 6th full-length studio album. They are a Swedish heavy metal band. As far as the design of this record, the album feels a little bit lopsided. The first two-thirds of the record are outstanding. Fluid, dynamic, engaging, offering the right ebbs and flows, inserting ballads in the right place so that the record gets breaks and the listener gets to feel a little bit better about the experience that you're having, because when the album has a lot of intensity, when the album has a lot of high tempos, you need a little bit of a slowdown every so often so that you can reset yourself and you can have a change in the eyesight, allowing you to better engage with the whole record in order to better engage with the songs and feel like the album is not one-dimensional, that the album has peaks and valleys, which also increases the playability of the record. The first two-thirds are exactly like that. The last third feels a little bit more chaotic. It feels like it doesn't have the same sense of purpose. It doesn't offer you the same attributes. Almost like those four songs at the end were quite different from everything else. Not knowing where to put them, they end up at the end of the record. I almost feel like the album should have finished with 9 songs and maybe add 2 as bonus tracks, but make sure they are really bonus tracks so that the listener can just adjust themselves for the experience of listening to those first two-thirds without having to find your way through the chaos that exists in that last portion of the record. As far as the sound is concerned, the album title represents the sound on this record to perfection. Nostalgia. This is a very throwback sounding record. Nothing new for Enforcer, but something that I thought was really interesting going with that title, and then perhaps turning all the way to 11, the old school approach that they have on every single album. When you look at this record, you look at the vocal performance, you look at the guitar sound, how warm the drums are, the overall production behind it, everything feels a little bit 80s. Even the way they use keyboard synthesizers on this album as layers of sound in order to create melody and also in order to create a certain vibe and a certain atmosphere of that era allows you to feel a lot more connected with the idea behind the album and then the album itself. So I like this connection between title and sound experience. Now when you dive deeper into the sound experience, this is an interesting record because of how things come together. The drums really sound like they are in the background, not even in the backseat, but really in the background. They help give some consistency to the overall soundscape, and they also give a sense of grounding to this record, but not overly grounding the album, because the guitars come across like they're floating on this album. You don't feel ever that this is a record that creates a wall of sound where drums and guitars become one. Never happens throughout the entire album. The two are always moving separate from one another, in the same direction, but not together in the same lane. And not having them together, having them separated from one another, creates depth. The sound on this album feels like it has layers, like it has depth to it. And that is what increases this sensation that the guitar sound is floating around. I honestly really enjoyed it because it allowed me to appreciate everything that went into the guitars, into the solos a lot better, because it's almost like I was listening to the guitar feed on its own, separate from everything else. And for an album that has this kind of sound, these tempos, this atmosphere, this approach works extremely well. It's exactly what you need, this differentiation of elements and not necessarily bringing them together and murking the waters, allowing you to feel a little bit lost on what is doing what and where the edges are on each and every single one of them. Here everything is super defined with great production behind it that really helps define the parameters of guitars and drums. On top of it all, you have Olaf on vocals, and he is an outstanding vocalist. Incredible range. And on this album, he doesn't hold back, not that he ever held back on previous records, but on this album, having the guitars floating, having the drums in the backdrop, and and then having the vocals come around and help connect the points, or at least try to be a bridge between everything else that is happening, but still feel very independent from those same elements, gives his vocal performance a lot more life, a lot more warmth. His highs are incredibly high. and the way he manages the lyrical content with his voice, with his tonality, with his delivery, it increases the overall vibe and atmosphere of the record, bringing everything together under that umbrella of nostalgia, including the vocal performance. All around, this is a great record by Enforcer. It's not an outstanding record. It's not like the record surprised me. They're a band that is so consistent in the quality of their albums. They're so consistent in the output with every single record that when you listen to an album like this, you feel like, oh, it's just Enforcer being Enforcer. If this album was being released by another band, I would be ranting and raving about how good it is. But Enforcer set the bar so high, and they always deliver, that this album just feels like it's them doing them. The design could have been better. The last end of the record loses me a little bit, but that takes nothing away from the individual quality of every single song. As far as favorite tracks are concerned, I want to start off with Unshackle Me. This is the second track, but technically the first track because the opening is an intro that builds into this one, so the two are kind of like part A and part B. This is a great way of starting the record. First of all, great synth sound that brings that 80s vibe into the soundscape of the track, something you're going to see throughout the rest of the record. Then it is a song that has a very melodic presence that is important as well. Not only being brought in by those synths, by those keyboards, but also by the guitar sound in general. The bass really pops on this track. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It has a subtle impact in how it pops and how it affects the overall warmth of sound that the song has. It's a little bit more controlled in the verses, and then it moves into a pre-stage in the pre-chorus. You could see the increase in movement, perhaps in intensity as well, in that pre-chorus, and then becoming very explosive once he reaches the chorus. That explosion in the chorus of sound and vocals makes the chorus memorable. Easy to remember, catchy, hooky on both ends, in terms of how it's delivered vocally and in terms of how it sounds. Very dynamic vocals throughout the entire song, and then a very explosive solo section. The solo section on this track is over the top, and that is the cherry on top of this cake. This is a song that's really complete across all the different elements. I like the fact that it has 3 different moments in sound, versus, pre-chorus, and chorus. And I like the fact that it offers you all the attributes, vocally and musically, that the whole album is going to have consistently from first all the way to last. Next we have Demon. Great tempo with this song. The guitars are running wild through this track. Jumping off the track, I should say. The guitars, talk about levitating, the sound of the guitars levitating. Listen to Demon. You really feel the guitars levitating off of this song. And the vocals do exactly the same thing. Both elements are levitating, both elements are separate from one another, and they have a nice impact because while they're floating around, you have the drums and bass right underneath it. This gives movement to the song. This makes the overall approach very interesting. It also allows for a song that doesn't change that much from verses to chorus. It actually feels like there's no drop, no high, no low, no ebbs and flows. A very linear track in terms of the movement, making it more dynamic because of the soundscape and how the song is put together, with where the guitars feel like they appear to be, where the vocals are, and then drums and bass behind it. This is important. Once again, you're making the song feel a lot more dynamic than what it really is, because when you look at the construction itself, the song feels very linear from start to end. Last but not least, No Tomorrow. Very explosive intro. I mean, it almost starts off, you almost feel like you're mid-song, and then it moves into a more melodic, I would say even methodic at times, texture sound, bringing a very vintage soundscape all around in terms of how this song comes across. Talk about creating an 80s vibe. This song really brings it to fruition. It's almost like if you took REO Speedwagon and you converted one of their songs into a metal track. That's how this track comes across. That's how this track really feels. It has those elements, both musically and vocally, stronger vocally, but definitely those elements musically. Now, it still depends heavily on the guitar sound to push itself forward. It has an outstanding vocal range from beginning to end, super dynamic, and then one of the best solo sections in the entire record. Talk about a song that's old school. Talk about nostalgia, talk about 80s. The solo section on this song is pure throwback in sound, in execution, and in how it was delivered. This is it. Enforcer, Nostalgia, out May 5th on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.